the next speaker, I'd like to introduce Lindsay Hardy, who is our account executive for DLT Solutions. Please welcome Lindsay.
Thank you, and I can assure you all the good people y'all are going to hear today, I'm not one of them. So I'll go right into DLT. We've been a great partnership with Informatica for 6+ years. We're GSA schedule holder along with various sundry GWAC contracts and that type of thing. But I think more importantly is who we've got here from Bloomberg. He's the Director of Government Research, formerly with the RAND Corporation. He dealt with various costs of defense systems as well as manpower, and with a degree in math from Columbia University and a PhD from economics from George Mason, it's my pleasure to introduce, and I'm going to try to make sure I get this right, Kevin Brancato.
Thank you very much. You heard Jim ask the question, is your data ready? And in the talk today, I want to give a personal example of where I think data is not ready. And because the mission of Bloomberg Government is very interesting. It's to provide data analysis, a lot about the federal market. And what I really wanted to do for this speech is to be able to size the federal market for enterprise data management, big data, and the like. But it turned out the data itself for that, we're not really ready for it. And that it is actually extremely difficult to use the federal government's data to try to size this. But before I begin, let me get a couple things out of the way. I want to talk about meeting agency missions with enterprise data management. I'll go through some background. But some of you all might not know, and I actually didn't know, that Bloomberg itself owns an enterprise data management company. I don't work for them. I don't sell them. There's a complete subsidiary. They work in the financial services market. But I want to make sure that people understood that that's not why I'm here. I work for Bloomberg Government, and it's an information source for the federal government. And we're all part of Bloomberg LP, but this is a completely separate enterprise. Now, yes, I direct the government sales research, and this should be a great day that agency leaders get to know how to achieve their missions using data. But if you look at the agenda says that I'm going to talk about enterprise data management, a view from above. Well, that seems to imply I actually know more about enterprise data management than you all do, and or more about your organizations than you do, and that's far from the truth. Because you all have the local knowledge and know the circumstances to have data work in your organizations. So given that I think the data are pretty shaky about this, I'm here to be a motivational speaker for enterprise data management, and I think I can do this with the case study that I have. Because as I was writing these remarks, I realized that the view from the outside I can probably offer much better than a view from above. But let me explain, because my job at Bloomberg Government is looking how the government buys goods and services. It doesn't matter if it's pencils, it's information technology, or major weapon systems. We look at the nuts and bolts of how they do that. We look at the data, the federal contracting data, the opportunities, any other presentations, stuff that's released, and we try to fuse all that together. And we look at the budgets, the contracts, the rules, laws, regulations, policies, you name it. And we see when there's a huge change in the marketplace. We can track companies. We can track how agencies are changing things. And we're trying to connect buyers and sellers, trying to provide reliable information about the past, and using that information to make objective assessments of where agencies are likely to spend money in the future. That's why we have clients in both companies and in agencies themselves. So when BGREV agreed to make this talk, I'd planned to walk you through how the government buys enterprise data management, much like I do when they're trying to buy the latest armored personnel carrier, or we're trying to procure Microsoft software licenses from hundreds of small businesses. And I was hoping to provide a snapshot of the biggest players and provide you vignettes about successful acquisitions of enterprise data management, and see how the changes in the rules impact this at the highest level, because that's usually what I do. for markets across all agencies. We have tools that let you do that. We can see how much money they're spending on drones or on phones or building new buildings or ripping them down. I can show you charts, graphs, how much contracts are about to expire and where the money's spent on them. And now I love putting numbers into fancy charts, looking really smart, and let the numbers tell the story for me as I stand up here and I can point to it and I say, here's the market, here's where it's going. But I can't do that for enterprise data management. And I know because I tried. I tried really hard and found so few transactions when I put it into the data using a pretty simple set of searches that I knew it was wrong, that I knew the information was not being coded in a way that somebody without deep expertise could possibly pull out. You would really have to know all the ins and outs of anything in enterprise data management or big data, because all I was getting when I did the search was about $10 million a year in transactions. I'm not going to put a chart up that I know is wrong. So I have the opportunity to stand up here and turn this into a speech for a motivational speech. But folks in agencies can't do that. You have to have the data you need to be able to make the appropriate decisions. And to do that, you'd have to have the technology background. And so I think one of us gets an excuse to avoid using the data, and that's me, but none of you get to do that. So I could have widened my search, use a bigger set of keywords, and really tried to figure out where all the money is. But as I realized, as I searched deeper and deeper, that's really not the approach that one needs when talking about enterprise data management. It's just not the right approach at all. Because enterprise data management isn't a product or a service or even a solution. To me, it's really an idea. It's a strategy. It's to help agencies, the people running agencies, running any parts of an organization, learn what the entire organization is doing, be able to track it, and learn about the people it serves and how well you're serving it. It requires setting up a systemic process for the creation, management, and use of data in the organization. Again, it's a principle. It's a whole set of ideas. It sets up these policies, these processes. It's going to help determine who owns data, the data structures, the data types. So that way, it's a very complex idea. I went through dozens, hundreds of different explanations of what enterprise data management is, and nobody talked the same language. And it was very difficult to be able to pull together exactly what one solution and how it mapped onto another. And you see tremendous numbers of complicated charts in agencies that have tried to implement this or in private organizations. They clearly understand what they're doing, but to convey it generically is very difficult. Each implementation is radically different in some ways. Whether you're a closely held company, such as Bloomberg's Polar Lake providing financial services, or you're providing one of the many components to an agency. So I realized the information at my disposal wasn't sufficient to address the questions I wanted. It's not possible to run a market sizing unless you're a true expert, and very few of us are. Because I don't have intimate knowledge of every part of a complex solution. No individual does. But I think that's a good reason for why you all need a team of people who understand each of the components and provide you with an enterprise data management process, structure, and the solutions inside. My data, the data for contracts and opportunities, it just isn't robust enough. And I know how this is collected. We've spoken with the people inside the federal government, but it's not just one place in the federal government. There are over 3,000 agencies in the federal government that can buy something. You're talking about a hugely complex task of trying to standardize data across the federal government. It's an enormous task that the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, has persistently tried to take for decades, if not longer. But it is such an enormous task that nobody can get their arms around it. That's just not how it works. So I want to be able to inform you how much enterprise data management overall the government wants, but that's not really clear. I think having a meeting like today where people can talk about what they need and how they need it, that's far more in this sort of market than many others, exactly what you need. So overall, going through this, I realized that and stop me if you don't believe it, that there could possibly be a failure of data management in the government. And in the short run, I didn't have the information I would need. Yeah. So I think we need to get back down to the basics a bit. There are 4 things that I want people to realize when planning for enterprise data management. They're very simple. One is agencies really need to know their missions. And it's not always obvious, right? And we tell this to our contracting clients all the time, that they have to know the agencies. You have to know the mission because it determines your approach to enterprise data management. And then on the flip side, the second thing I think you need to focus on is you need to know the analytics that you're going to want to produce, because that's going to also determine the approach you can make and the data that you need. And 3, given the necessity that we see across, particularly in the Department of Defense, but elsewhere, an open architecture approach. It is absolutely necessary. If that is not going to be taken, then it is the harbinger of failure. Not immediately. These can be extremely successful closed solutions. But later on, when there's a whole different team and different set of people who are trying to do this. And the 4th thing I'm going to ask, and this is something I've touched on earlier, I need everyone to speak plainly. In fact, you all need to speak plainly to each other because you don't. I hear this all the time about people, don't use jargon when discussing these things. You're dealing with lots of people who do not each have an understanding of what you're talking about. If it's the agency, speak plainly about your mission. If you're if you're providing a portion of the solution, exactly what do you provide? And it's not always obvious that you're not speaking plainly. I do that all the time. I see it. I'll write pieces. That's just what I do, and I'll hand it to my editor, and she'll look at me and she'll go, "What does this mean?" And I thought it was being completely and absolutely clear. And I see this a lot of the times in the literature that is provided in enterprise data management. And I want to make sure that people are getting together. And by speaking plainly, let me give you some examples, because the terms themselves are widely used, but it doesn't matter what words are used. So if you're speaking about enterprise data management, big data or data-driven strategy, data science, data visualization, data analytics, data management policies, data storage management, just forget about the words and figure out in an agency what you need to do, because these are just technical terms for developing solutions to help you determine what you need to do. These terms make my eyes glaze over. As I said before, I'm an economist. I need to be able to use data at my disposal so I can take my analytical approach to it. And if I don't have that data, I can't do it. And particularly today, where I found that I can't do what I need to do, is extraordinarily frustrating. That's what I'm paid to look at markets. I'm paid to understand that. And it's not there. I mean, at Bloomberg, though, we've attempted to resolve this problem. We know there are big problems with the data. And I'll go in a little bit about how we fix that. I started by saying that you all have local knowledge to make the enterprise data management work. And EDM is about making sure that local knowledge is seen by everyone else who needs it. But that's not a trivial exercise. So I'm not going to go through a lot of the successes and failures. I think a lot of people who are going to come after me, I've had to manage them or know a lot more about them. But in my research for this, I would particularly take a look at how the Federal Student Aid Office in the Department of Education set up their enterprise data management framework, because the information out there appears to be clear. And if not exactly what you need because it's somewhat dated, at least the approach taken, the explanation of the approach, that's what's really important. So as I said before, my analyst team, we often talk to federal contractors at all levels. We tell them they need to know their customer, they need to know the mission, they need to know the budgets of the customer, the pressures that you all are under, explain how specific technologies can help agencies meet their missions, especially when agencies have been burned in the past or feel that they've been burned in the past by solutions that aren't really solutions. And so it actually pleases me to speak to an audience that's more agency-specific to tell the same things about contractors. You need to know what the contractor is trying to sell you. It's very specific. You need to know the specialties. You need to know who you'll be working with and what the aims of the contractor are. And for a long time, I've assumed that businesses and agencies know their own missions. They know their own specialties. But I've started doubting that. I started telling folks, just look within their own organizations before they look out. Because the literature on enterprise data management is littered with decades of failure, people spending tons of money and coming up with minimal solutions, trying to do too much too fast, and not appearing to get very much for it. So let me not be very negative about it. No, so if enterprise data management is so hard, why should you try to implement it? Well, for one, it's going to set up a framework to let you deal with the unexpected. If it's a security challenge or it's a rising to another challenge, you need to have that information at your disposal to be able to address it. You're going to be asked uncomfortable questions by political leaders, and you need to be able to provide the answers. You won't be able to do that otherwise. And I mean, why should you do it? The information is the future. So you need to be able to focus on what you can achieve with the data when you have the right tools in place. I can't be the sort of person to tell you what those tools are. I want those tools given to me myself. I'd like to be able to analyze the data and say, here's what the market looks like, and then dive deep down and say, Homeland Security in this year had this sort of solution, education had this sort of solution, really bring it to you together and understand it. But it turns out the information is not made available in that way. In order to be able to solve really hard problems, you need to have more than a motivational speech. You need to have the data. You need hard, reliable information at your fingertips, but it doesn't exist unless you work hard to create it. It's got to be a concerted effort across the organization. I mean, and that's what, I mean, my example of Bloomberg government is what we do. I mean, Bloomberg government exists in part because of this data failure on the part of the government. The government has all this contracting data across these 3,000 agencies. It has all these opportunities notices across all these departments, and the information is extraordinarily fragmented. It's not a standardized format. There's no one place to put it. So we clean, we integrate, we provide tools and analysis for both the contractor and agency community. I mean, but to do this, we don't just have people like me, because I need to use the data. We have a whole ream of people whose job it is essentially to take the data and put it all together. And put it all together in a way and check it, just to go through, does it make sense that the federal government said it was going to spend $4 trillion on something? No, it doesn't. Yet we see that all the time in the data. We see a construction contract for a building in South Korea that would be $4 billion. And it's remarkable. That's not the case. It's nowhere near it. And we know it. And the people who enter that information know it. But it's only after tracking down and realizing that they hired a certain contracting officer for about 6 months that kept entering the information wrong. Every single transaction that was entered was wrong. It had 3 extra digits. It wasn't 4 billion, it was 4 million. And you saw it consistently across them. But it took a really long time to figure that out. And it was a number that would greatly alter the relative budgets or the obligations of one agency versus the other. And so again, we have 2 types of analysts. Some, like me, really analyze the data, but we also have data scientists. And I mean, their job is to structure and fix and make connections in the data. But our split is about 50-50. So when you look at the resources that we use a huge amount of resources just taking the data that's out there and trying to make it usable so my team can go and then use it. That is a really hard burden to meet. We have an internal way of doing that. That's the organization that we have. But it's just imagine what we could do if we didn't need to do that. If we could have twice the team doing the sorts of analysis that we do in a market assessment, of going out and saying, we had a webinar, for example, last week, where we talked about competition in procurement in the Department of Defense. There is so much data. There are so many transactions in the federal market, into millions and millions, that the top computer guy that we had, the program he ran crashed 20 times. We could not get the data to run effectively on his machine. And when we did, it took countless iterations. This is how we found out the example of the billion-dollar construction contracts. We found countless examples of the government entering that there were several thousand competitors for a contract. I know Informatica is going to be really crazy if you had to compete with 1,000 others. It's clearly not the case. We know it's not the case, but that's the information that's listed. And to be able to go and figure out exactly what information is accurate in that case was very difficult. And so we had to start making judgments. And this is something that I think is really interesting that a lot of people don't address, is that your data is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfectly clean. You're always going to have some issues. And I think I have a couple of, yeah, the lessons learned. This is lessons learned the hard way. Yeah, your data is never going to be perfect. Your leaders are never going to be satisfied. And your reports could always be better. And it's the approach that we take when saying, OK, we need to see what is the art of the possible. And that's why we're always trying to improve our structure. And it's just not obvious where the stopping point should be. You always want to improve it a little bit more. You always want to try a little bit more. And when you think you've exhausted one approach, you want to try another. This is why I think having a large, diverse team of people supporting you is very important. Because as I said, the data scrubbing and networking, connecting it is an enormous burden. And it's cost-effective for us in Bloomberg government because we have such a wide variety of clients. You don't want 100 different organizations doing this. You don't want one centralized organization to have, at least in the federal government, to have accurate data that is faithful, that you can rely on. We don't have that, so that's what we're trying to do. And what we have now in the marketplace is Bloomberg government and a few other competitors trying to do the same thing, trying to meet up for what we think is a data management failure. But that's also why you need to do it too, because the increased accuracy of information and transparency to the American people far outweighs the cost. So there were many different examples of EDM in private industry. They've been at the state level. They were at the federal level. Contracting data is the example that I use. And I use that example because I know it well, right? There are examples of EDM in defense and education and homeland security. And I think you're going to hear from lots of people about that. But one of the things that I've learned is that as an analyst, you never, ever know more than the people who you're talking to or that you're analyzing. And we leave a huge portion of anything that we do for questions and answers. And I was going to invite anyone in the audience, if you had specific questions, to please ask them at this time. Nope. OK. So that's what I got. Oh, we do.
Mike, anybody? Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Just one of the 4 items that you mentioned at the beginning, one of them was open architecture.
Yes.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. This is something that we've seen in the Department of Defense quite a bit, that they have purchased systems where the ability to connect to that or read information requires a proprietary interface. So the contractor that has set this up essentially has set it up in a way that only they can maintain it, only they can add to it, only they can mod it. And that's fine. It actually works. It's like the Apple it's like the Apple ecosystem, right? You want to be part of it, it works seamlessly. But you would think more of it along the lines of if you want to write an app for the iPad, they have a certain set interface. And that interface is well known and published. That's what you can think about open architecture to be, is that the interface is well known. I think that's not an exact analogy, but it's one that the broadest number of people in the audience could probably understand.
Question here? Excellent. And while I'm walking up, there is Wi-Fi here, and the password is Informatica, all lowercase, if anyone needs to access Wi-Fi.
Good morning. My name is CJ Staten from LabAnswer. One of the things I found, because we do integration of information across laboratory systems, is it's actually the security and the mistrust that has become the issues. I'm doing a system now for Army, Navy, Air Force, and we've been arguing for 4 months about where the data is going to reside because nobody trusts each other. Do you see that as getting better or worse? Because that's really become the big issue for us, is the information assurance requirements to share data.
This is a sort of question I'd like to answer with a top-down authority. What do the rules and regulations say? But they don't say anything about trust. Yeah, so you're in an environment where I think they're likely to start accepting, if you can demonstrate a secure solution, then that would be accepted. But I think it's not really a lack of trust, it's more of an uncertainty about what is acceptable, what is the standard for the government to have. There's no written guideline to say, here's what we can do or where we can't do it. They don't have, I mean, DISA at one point was providing a gateway for, here's how you have to do everything, right? Now it's more advice or a gateway for approval, and that leads to a more chaotic market. So I don't have a direct answer for you, but I think there's no good reason on the top down to assume it's going to get any more trustful or better, because that's not, as far as I can see, been a key concern. Like, figure it out. They're basically telling agencies, go figure it out. And eventually, when they do figure it out, maybe they'll have a preferred solution. But if you're not hosting the data in China, I guess they're going to, then that's not a concern. The question is, what is the acceptable palette of solutions for them? And I think you'd have to restructure the discussion for saying, this is just as secure or more secure. Here are the pros and cons of this. And the question is who you're talking to here. If it's a contracting officer and they have a problem in the contract, or if it's high-level program officials that they're concerned that they're making what looks like a poor choice. That's tough to say.
Mike, to you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the fact that you just talked about data never going to be perfectly clean, leaders never satisfied, and reports could always be better, and the stopping point is not clear. Could you provide us some guidance on that stopping point?
For the past, I've been in this at Bloomberg for about 4.5 years now. That stopping a point is basically when I'm exhausted. Frankly, that's because I know my clients are demanding the best I can do. That's not feasible, right? You can't. That's not something you could say. Everyone's going to work until they're drop dead tired. So in terms of being able to say where are the errors and saying, okay, I'm happy if I'm only cutting out, for this contract data, say 2% of the transactions. And setting up a rule where I don't think something is significantly altering a decision I will make, right? So the data are clean enough to make an accurate decision. I have 2 things I need to choose between. The data are clean enough. It doesn't matter if they're really, really wrong in a small share of them. I'm going to still make the same decision. I took decision theory a long, long time ago, and that's all I remember of it. But I think that's the general rule of thumb, is that you need to have it clean enough to make those decisions. Now, the big problem with enterprise data management is you're talking about a structure to make every decision, because the data is underneath. So how clean does something have to be? It's good enough for one decision. It's not good enough for another. That's a big problem. And so you have to really think through completely what's the universe of decisions that this data is going to inform. And there are some things it's never going to be good enough to decide. You have to be willing to accept that. I know there are huge numbers of transactions in that contracting database that don't exist. They're not there. I know they're there. I've seen them. I've talked to the people who have done them. It's not there. Well, what am I going to do? I could try to enter them, or I could just note that they're not there. They're 2 different approaches, and you just have to accept that both are serving different ends, and note that this is the best data we have. We could improve it. It would take a lot of money to do that, and then decide, is that something you want to do? Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you,
Thank
Kevin.
you.
So thank you. Lots of good topics. Great to hear the conversation. Real thankful for the dialogue there. It makes it so much more meaningful. We can continue these conversations throughout the day.